What an excellent introduction to a session that's focused on data. But before I get there, and speaking of data, some have been asking, as my pocket has been buzzing, about Wi-Fi. While I encourage you to pay attention up here, I recognize the vagaries of the day may consume you elsewhere at different times. There is Wi-Fi information. It's UT guest. Feel free to hop right on if you need to access things outside of this room. But our first panel, which we're going to jump into now, is going to focus on data to address societal needs. That's a specific element for in the forum blueprint. And the goal really of this discussion is to highlight various perspectives that connect ocean exploration data to critical societal needs. Dr. Vicki Ferrini, Senior Research Scientist at Columbia University's Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, will moderate this session for us this morning. While Dr. Ferrini's work includes mapping in shallow and deep sea environments, much of her work is in the field of geoinformatics and focused on ensuring that high quality marine geoscience research data are made available publicly to the science community and more broadly to the public, an important part of this session. So please join me in welcoming Vicki and the panelists to the stage.
Great. So I'm just going to stay seated over here with the panelists, keep us a little bit informal. Thank you for the chance to moderate this panel. It's really exciting. It's really great to see so many faces, though a little bit scary. I'm going to start us off just with a brief self-introduction of the panelists. I don't need to introduce myself since Alan just did that. So we'll just go down the line here and Justin can introduce himself next.
Thanks, Vicki. I'm happy to be here. My perspective today, I'm coming from the fourth act. I've done government, academia, startups, and industry, and these days I do a lot of work in ocean impact philanthropy and ocean impact investing. So really coming at that conservation and technology angle.
Howdy, I'm Drew Stevens. I'm with Cardinal Point Captains. This is my third forum. I was at that first one with Dawn many years ago and appreciating that and appreciating her perspective. I worked for Esri as the oceans industry manager for about 10 years alongside Dawn and many others. And now I'm helping NOAA take care of sanctuaries and a lot of other stuff with CPC.
Millie Pitts. I'm the executive director of Ocean Exchange, and we're a nonprofit and we support startups with innovation for healthy oceans and resilient coastal systems. We also have some focus on zero emissions and the decarbonization of ocean shipping and goods movement. I spent 30 years in the chemical and materials industry, so I'm relatively new in 10 years to the ocean community. So I'm in the community, not of the community. In 2020, I was very honored to be part of the NOAA subcommittee for the blue economy, and I hope the blue economy gets some discussion over the next 2 days. Very pleased to be here.
Akwe Winikasek Kelsey Leonard Nuiswonk. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kelsey Leonard. I'm a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Waters, Climate and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. But I'm also a citizen of the Shinnecock Nation located on what is currently known as the east end of Long Island in New York. And I serve as a steering committee member for the Mid-Atlantic Committee on the Ocean. Happy to be here with you all.
Great, thank you, everyone. So in preparation for this panel, we had a few conversations over Zoom to get to know each other and sort of share some thoughts about perspectives. And really, we're at a moment now to think about the next decade and how to be more inclusive and to share the work that we do with a broader community and to really connect more. And in my view and in my experience, data is a really wonderful way to connect people and communities and ideas. And so it's a really exciting chance for us to talk about data and society. The word cloud that you see is a combination of some of the how we explore and why we explore themes that were in the matrix of the blueprint that's been presented, and also some of the key words from our conversations. So just to sort of set a little bit of tone for us. The way we're going to go through the next, or this session, however long it lasts, is to go through a few questions and really just sort of have a conversation, bringing these different perspectives together to talk about how ocean data, how ocean exploration data can really be used to address societal needs. So the first question, which I will address, I made some decisions to Drew, is how do we define societal needs?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I think I'd start with, just sort of a goal statement around it. I've been carrying this little personal set of goals that are called the BHAGs, the Big, Hairy, Audacious Goals. And it's fish stocks and keeping protein on the planet for people that need it. It's pollution, be it marine debris or chemical. It's temperature and ocean acidification. And if those weren't things we needed to address, we might not be here. So that's just the top level. Once we get into how do we define these needs, one of the things we came up with was, who are we to decide what society's needs are? So then I pivot to community. And I think it's an important goal for all of us this week, as well as for growing this sort of group. Listening to community, understanding who they are, bringing youth in and bringing educators in to even meetings like this, I think are critical just to see what we're talking about. The other side of it is hands-on for me. I work with the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, and we're building what's called a GIS hub. It's part of this geospatial infrastructure that Dawn was talking about. And the Gulf of Mexico Alliance is just a little small, mighty nonprofit that has 1,000 members across 100 organizations in the Gulf. And their whole mission is just align funding, align work to have data cross state lines, if you will. So they already have communities of practice in place. And those communities are quite clear about what they want. And we're addressing this geospatial hub to address these different communities of practice. Just for example, the oyster community of practice, the mangrove, the seagrass. There are specialists across these different state agencies and nonprofits that do that work. And to be able to have data flow up and back down into these communities, I think is key. And I'll just leave it at that for starters.
Does anybody else have any thoughts to contribute on this one?
Sure, I can. I think when we're thinking about this question, it comes back to this idea of what is society? What is these societal needs? Well, when you actually look at the root definition of society, it comes from the Latin socius, which means friend or ally, defined by having a bond or a connection. Our greatest friend or ally in the history of what you call exploration is the ocean itself. And for so many individuals, as well as communities and collectives, they have built a sustained bond and connection with the ocean over millennia. Those are the individuals, the communities, the collectives that should be leading this conversation. Indigenous peoples, island peoples, coastal peoples. And in addition to leading that conversation, I think they would say, we don't lead it. We facilitate that stewardship of that bond and that connection in such a manner that we don't ask what we need, but what does the ocean need? We have a problem within our global society where we promote supremacist ideologies of humanity, that humanity stands above nature, that humanity stands above the ocean. When you're asking, what does society need? Instead, you should be asking, what does the ocean need? Because the ocean is your first friend and ally that promotes your continued existence on this planet.
That's really great. Thank you for that. That's even much beyond what I was going to add, which was how do we get the input from these broader groups to help us envision what both society and the ocean needs? How do we bring that all together?
I'll comment from a business perspective. If we were talking to a business, and I think there's an analog here, we would do something called customer discovery, right? And a startup business cannot really move forward effectively in any way until they talk to their customers. Now, Kelsey is suggesting that we ask the ocean, right, that we address those needs first. But there's also the needs of society for food and energy, and we have to sustain the societies. So I would say that we cannot move forward until we take that first step. As if this were a business, as if it were a startup, we have to go out and actually address those entities, even if it's the ocean, and figure that out and inventory that and talk to each other about that as a very first step.
I'm going to test my new mic. Ooh, it works. Actually, I wanted to add a comment. So another term of art I like to use is product market fit, right? And this question of societal needs, the thing about ocean generally, exploration or otherwise, is unlike many of our day-to-day life experiences, a whole subset of society is blissfully or unfortunately unaware of ocean, right? So this, I'm sort of cheating us into the next question. But ocean exploration is a powerful tool for breaking down that barrier and that lack of awareness. Certainly much more compelling. Basic oceanography may be really, really exciting to some of us, but it doesn't draw the same mystique as discovering a new species or discovering a shipwreck. So I think that is a really powerful opportunity we have to use maybe not the underlying data, but the high level information of ocean exploration to bring society as a whole along on this really important journey of understanding.
Well, you segued so well. I was going to have you answer the next question. Do you want to just keep going? And
I'm going to keep riffing on
Yeah,
why
go
ocean
for it.
exploration is important, right? Actually, I prepared a much less eloquent quote, but a hero of my youth, G.I. Joe, had this expression that knowing is half the battle, right? And so why ocean exploration matters is we don't know what we don't know, right? And any of us who spent any time pouring through the databases that on one hand seem immense. You sit down and how many terabytes of data do I have and how many hours am I going to spend curating it? And yet it's just the drop, right, in the proverbial bucket. So pulling back and identifying the unknowns in a product market fit analogy, we're looking for our super users, right? Ocean exploration is that awesome customer of or discoverer of new features and new requirements that's going to drive a virtuous cycle of growth in all these aspects of ocean understanding. So I really, as a technologist, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, we use the words innovation and disruption a lot in my world, and they belong here. And that's why I'm so excited about ocean exploration as a feature of our ocean society.
Great. Anybody else have a comment?
Well, I'd just chime in with the expanding group of ocean exploration tools with all the autonomous technology that's out there. The importance of it and the cool factor of following it as an educational tool, I think shouldn't be overlooked. And I'm sure we'll get into it more in the forum this week. I know several of the papers talk about the difference between all this autonomy and the ships. And I'm really looking forward to getting into that one.
No? Kelsey, anything from your perspective?
I looked at the definition for exploration, and it says to travel or find new knowledge of a place or area that is unfamiliar to you. And quite honestly, for, as I mentioned earlier, so many communities around the world and for the ocean itself, it's not unfamiliar. So I think this forum has a lot to grapple with in terms of the language that you use and how you interact with communities in labeling their vast amounts of scientific knowledge as unfamiliar and needing to be explored. There's language around pioneering and discovery, and I think it promotes an ethic of colonialism and extractivism that can be very, very damaging and not necessarily the hopeful, resilient future that you want, where you want to tap into collaboration and to coordination and to conversation where we can learn and grow together. And I think sometimes the language that we choose can stifle that immediately.
Yeah, that's a really, really important perspective. From my own lens, there was a forum, an ocean exploration forum a few years ago that was entitled Ocean Exploration in a Sea of Data. And so from my perspective, exploration is not just the act of acquiring new data and revealing the unseen, but also exploring the data that exists and data that was acquired for other reasons that fits into the same paradigm to help us learn new things. So I think that I think as we evolve as a community in this space, we have to really pay more attention to these different perspectives on what we do, the words that we use, how we approach this work, and how we try to be really more inclusive and learn from all these different perspectives on the ocean and its importance and relevance. This kind of goes back to your earlier statement, Kelsey, about what the ocean needs, right? We need the ocean and the ocean needs us, and we have to develop this symbiotic relationship or build it stronger so that it can continue to take care of life on Earth, right? Particularly in this moment as the planet is in a very serious transition, right? So there are, I think, many, many reasons that ocean exploration in particular and oceans are really important to society. And it's really, I think, upon all of us to figure out ways to build those connections and get the word out and provide the information in multiple directions to get everyone engaged.
You used the term extractive, and in the 10 years ago, if we talked about the blue economy, I think the default reaction was that it was extractive industries, that we were using the ocean and not restoring it or giving back in a certain way. I think NOAA has done a good job, and others as well, trying to redefine that, because society has many, many needs today. NOAA, I have a bias in terms of NOAA's definition of the blue economy, but there are 10 verticals there. And if you don't know them, I would encourage you to Google them. I won't go through it all. But I think NOAA and others are making tremendous effort to redefine this so that it is more inclusive, and it includes taking care of the ocean, not just taking from the ocean.
All right, so we move on to our next question. So this one is, how can ocean exploration data, or perhaps we should phrase that as data, information, and knowledge. So there's a continuum there, right? Meet the needs of society. And I thought actually, Kelsey, maybe you could start off with this one.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a way in which data allows data, information, and knowledge, this collective ecosystem, allows for there to be greater democratization of our communities, of our global society. But we have to actually do that with intention and with purpose. We have to think about operability. We have to think about user interface. We have to think about, usability of a diverse set of users, so that we're not just designing these systems to be utilized by federal agencies or by those who have economic power, but that communities and those who are most impacted by these climatic changes and by the crises that we're facing in our planetary well-being can actually use this information to assist their daily lives. So I think, when we think about data, it should be about how do we create more democratic and democratized ecosystems of data interfaces. And I think there are some really great examples of that in terms of some of the ocean data portals that have been developed by the regional ocean partnerships, some other data portals that are now existing, and also the way in which we're seeing the governance of international data, particularly ocean data, emerging in conversations around ethics and principles. And so One that I love to highlight is the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, which says many of you may be familiar with the FAIR principles of data, but you may not be familiar with these Indigenous data governance principles that were put forward by the Alliance about 2 years ago now, and they stand for CARE. And so it's this idea of be fair and care. And that's to ensure that anytime you are collecting data that has relevance or pertinence to Indigenous peoples or is within their Indigenous territory and waters, including the ocean, they have agency, autonomy, and rights to govern that data. And so I think that really is the future of where we need to be thinking about democratization of data, particularly when it advances notions also of justice. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I am highly concerned with the way in which we talk a lot about open data, but everyone in this room in some form or fashion has monetized data. Just by your existing employment, you are reaping the benefits of the monetization of ocean data. And so many communities around the world are suffering and not getting equal distributions of that economic wealth. And so we need to also address the wealth in the room.
I need to sit with that for a minute because that's a very powerful perspective and really important. Does anyone else have something to add? Go ahead.
You know, I come from the dark side of business, and jobs are important, and how they're distributed in society is very important, and you mentioned that. Data cuts across all of the ways we think about ocean exploration. Vicki, you started saying it can be the glue that starts to tie all this together. I think that was the quote of the day for me, however you said it. I liked all the white papers, but I was particularly struck by the one by Drs. Carr and Kay, and they talked about the extrinsic value. And we need to start understanding more about that as a society, not just to extract it for the wealthy. These jobs that can be created by ocean exploration are very powerful, and I think that they can be in a strata of skill levels down to lower skill levels. They need great jobs as well to lift up their standard of living, their ability to raise their families, educate children, all of that. And I think there is a great opportunity in that ocean exploration area, community, to look outside of the community and start learning how to convey that extrinsic value. I really love that particular white paper.
And I'd like to add the question we're trying to answer. I think sometimes, and Vicki and I have talked about, the abundance of data is a good thing. And as importantly, other folks in other parts of organizations need to focus on the question we're trying to answer so that the data product that answers the question can be developed openly and something that anybody can go and go, I see the answer to this question. So it's not looking at the data so much as the dashboard or the map. And I think that's an important part of all this. More data, yes, and attention to detail on the questions we're trying to answer. Just one little anecdote there, Esri has a product or a program called the Living Atlas. And the sort of litmus to what data go into this Living Atlas, it's a lot of live time-enabled services of every aspect of the planet. They make sure it answers questions. It's not just the Palm Springs bike path, it's how to build a bike path for your city. And so if it's answering questions for large groups of people, it goes in. And it's a really nice sort of litmus test of what data to focus on.
I'd love to chime in with I've got a very clear case study of ocean exploration meeting societal needs from a week ago. So I had the good fortune to be in London and I'm flying home and open the window and the pilot tells us to look out. And I actually got to see a real at-scale offshore wind farm, like hundreds of turbines. And this is off the coast of Ireland. Okay, what's the societal need? Right now, Europe could use some energy, right, from friendly places. So they've got some right there off the coast. What does that have to do with ocean exploration? Many years ago, Ireland set out to map their entire EEZ. So they had the underlying information they needed. Again, I know nothing about the history of that wind farm, right? But I presume they did it in a relatively intelligent, thoughtful manner because they had the underlying information. So now, years later, they've got this wind farm, and at least whoever's drawing the energy from that wind farm, that piece of society is benefiting from that ocean exploration process, right? So the fundamental connectivity of exploring, mapping, and understanding back to a fundamental societal need, particularly right now in that part of the world, was very palpable in that like 10 seconds looking out the window going, whoa, like it was a real brain, you know, for me, it was an impactful moment. And I think it reminds us a lot of what we can do here to add value.
And not only does that provide power, but jobs and all sorts of things, right? There are many dimensions to it. So a couple of things that kind of came into my head during this that I thought were worth sharing is I think maybe we tend, many people, not myself, of course, as a data geek that I am, but we may tend to think about data as, you know, very binary and non-personal. And what we really, I think, are hearing is that like the personal aspect really needs to be woven in, the human part. And without that, it's just ones and zeros, right? Like we have to be able to pull it together. We have to transform it into information products that answer questions and can result in action. And one of my favorite things, this was sort of mentioned, but open access data is not accessible. It's just a bunch of data that's out there that some people know how to find easily. Some people know how to find parts of it. But so what? How do we get to that next point where it all comes together and becomes, you know, the whole that's bigger than the sum of the parts, right? For real, and delivers not just to our community, but to the fishermen and the people that are building the offshore infrastructure and the people that are developing the offshore, you know, like all of this, that's the opportunity, I think, to really impact society with data, ocean data. So we go on to our next question. So this one's pretty open-ended. I have no clock with me because I'm out of practice and I'm used to having everything around me. So I have no idea how we're doing on time. Good, all right, great. So this one's sort of an open-ended one about what are the barriers and opportunities? And I think we could go pretty far on this, or if we have time, we can potentially get some input from the audience after we go through this. But we're gonna start with Millie on this one, please.
Maybe I'm going to riff off of what Justin talked about the wind farm. In preparation for this, I went back and looked at work that had been commissioned by the high-level panel for ocean sustainability, and they identified 5 areas of opportunity. And we hadn't had that conversation, Kelsey, yet about the ocean's needs, but these 5 areas address ocean need and address human needs. So one, and I'll just list them off. One is coastal water quality, which is about the quality of the ocean. It's also about humans, tourism, and other uses there. One is about coastal restoration, clearly the needs of the ocean, restoring it because of other kind of damage that's been done by humans or other events. The third one is non-fed mariculture. Can be very restorative to the ocean, depending on what it is. Offshore, using the ocean for energy. And the last one was ocean maritime, a topic that probably a whole lot of people don't think about. I think about it a lot. And data underscores all of these. Again, it can be the platform to engage people. It's a great opportunity. It can engage young people. It can engage all people in society, investors, business, scientists, academia, and so forth.
Anyone else have a thought to add?
I'll throw some barriers out.
Do it.
You know, oceanology makes me think about, this is a really big ocean technology conference, as well as everything else you could imagine. And you walk through there and there's so much hardware. There's so many toys, and some of it goes straight to your phone. Some of it goes to a C drive. Some of it goes to the cloud. And I think one of the simplest barriers is, you know, how can we just put all that in the same funnel? And the technology's there. It's the driver. I think the economic driver is not quite there. And even companies like Esri have tools to network all that stuff together. But and we'll talk about this in a panel tomorrow, I believe, on connectivity and scaling. But I think one of the simplest is there's just so many different hardware structures out there. So it's going to be about standards, and we'll talk more about that. And the opportunities right there on the flip side. Like, imagine all that connected up well and open as it can be.
I will chime in with just the opportunity side of the ledger. So I'm a techno-optimist. We are living in a golden age of technology, oceanology technology display, right? Platforms and accessibility to the ocean are on a curve approaching zero cost. They will never be zero cost, but as compared to the tools of the past, our ability to get in the ocean and find data with emerging new classes of instruments is changing incredibly fast. That's one opportunity, right? Completely changing our MO and our thought process and temporal and spatial scales of exploration and study. Throw it all out, start over, think big, think different. And then while we're at it, the other tremendous opportunity, we sort of alluded to the new blue economy. We've alluded to the dark side of industry. Well, there is immense amounts of capital, right? So this group is coming typically from a government academic research mindset. The sheer volume of financial resources available through private philanthropy, through corporate philanthropy. Corporations like Microsoft are putting tens of millions of dollars into startup companies that maybe are not ocean exploration related, but are ocean conservation related, right? There is a huge opportunity if we can take our community and align it with that community in an appropriately virtuous way. But the scalability factor is just tremendous. You know, I'm really optimistic for the next decade in terms of outcomes we can find. So I'm a big fan of opportunities. Barriers are run over by the power of opportunity.
I totally agree, Justin. Something that I just wanted to add to that is, you know, often, at least in my professional experience, data and data management, and, you know, maybe in the more academic side of things, is often an afterthought. It's a requirement. It's not what leads. It's what has to be done. It's done to the minimum level by most, not all, some are exemplar. But we really need to invert the model, many models. I talk about this a lot, everything, so many things have to be sort of upended, but we have to lead with intention on data and inclusion. The synergy between those two realms is really continuing to stun me in terms of how much synergy there is. But if we lead with data and a plan for data and a vision for data, as all of these new sensors come online and this new opportunity presents itself, we'll be in a better place than we are now, where we're scrambling to connect disparate databases and disparate data sets and disparate practices. If we can do it with a plan and a vision, we will go much further. And that's a huge opportunity on all of us, and particularly when we bring in different sectors and different funding mechanisms, because data is always, in my experience, underfunded. Takes a lot of work. It doesn't just happen. There's people with expertise that develop new approaches and new processes to help deliver these things, right? So that is a piece that is an opportunity that we need to figure out how to address.
Do you know what one of the highest
Barrier,
paying
yeah.
job titles in Silicon Valley is? Data scientist,
Yeah.
right? Like, people make immense amounts of money in the private sector dealing with these problems because they've embraced it. Why? I pull out my phone to Google Maps to figure out where to go to dinner last night. I just assume that the information I need, empowered by the data, works, right? If we can get to that mode in this industry, this field, it'd be profound.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll address a barrier. I think all of us need to get out of our own space and talk to other people across all of these levels of society. And, you know, we're humans. We like talking to those like us, right? And I suspect ocean explorers get they have a blast talking to other ocean explorers. And we're going to have to create the opportunities for that intersection to happen. It will not happen naturally, in my opinion, because of our default reaction of who we hang out with, right? And that deals with all sorts of diversity and inclusion, right? It's across different businesses, across people with different experiences, different technical backgrounds, different business backgrounds. And I think it's a huge barrier, and we're going to have to knock it down, or we're never going to advance.
I'll just, I'll add, maybe I'll start with a barrier and then end with an opportunity, so it's more hopeful. I think one of the barriers is within this sector, not thinking about the entire life cycle of these ecosystems. So your ability for new technology to have these mass amounts of data centers and servers and all of the tech that's woven into that, where do those raw materials come from? Do you have any? All of us are complicit. We have a lithium mine somewhere being held in all of the technology that we have in this room today, that a child has died so that we could have this access to tech. So we have to think about the entire life cycle of how we're engaging in this system. And the opportunity, the hopefulness here is, I've heard a lot about the blue economy. I've heard a lot about, what the ocean can do for us. But every time you think about these particular concepts, I hope you will also think about blue justice. Nathan Bennett et al. Wrote a wonderful paper on blue justice that you can go and look at. But there's also, within that conceptualization of blue justice, I might say it may be more integral for you to think about ocean justice, because blue justice, again, centers on these needs of humans. But what are the needs of the ocean itself? And when we look at what we are creating to advance this exploration, how are we considering the procedural, distributional, and recognitional justice that needs to occur? What is being given back to those communities that you're stripping that lithium from? How are they benefiting from this exploration? If you've never had to ask yourself that question, then it shows an air of the privilege that we all exist within this room today. And we have to address that.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and something that came to my mind with respect to data specifically, which is a question that I grapple with, is, thinking about the large volumes that we're accumulating of data. Is all data necessary to preserve? We need to be intentional about the observations and the data that we collect and preserve, rather than, even with our phones, right? Like people throwing pictures and videos into that costs. There are costs of that are transparent to people with privilege in particular, right? So approaching data and society and the ocean with a real intentionality and understanding what's necessary, what the impacts are, thinking about all that and thinking about how to connect this new ecosystem that we're trying to build of people working in this space and sharing ideas and knowledge and understanding in this space, I think is our big challenge.
So it just occurred to me as I'm listening to that, right, with fundamentally what society, our species has done on land, we haven't fully accomplished in the ocean yet. We have not industrialized, agriculturalized, we have not taken over our ocean planet, right? Hopefully, fortunately for a good thing, right? So the opportunity that ocean exploration and intentional data will allow us to do, subject to all the vagaries of policy and treaties, et cetera, and the high seas versus not, there is still an opportunity for the majority of our actual physical planet to bring a different model to bear, right? To life cycle changes, right? If we have the understanding of it, which we still do not, right? So we've mapped our way across land, we've explored, we've pioneered, we've factoried, we've farmed. We haven't done any of that in the ocean yet. And so if we plan ahead and we explore wisely, we can lay the framework for that sort of virtuous cycle that I think everybody's talking about.
Yeah, I think that planning is really critical, right? We don't want to just instrument the ocean and throw a bunch of stuff out there willy-nilly and have it be driven by competing interests trying to just get their own initiatives moved forward. We want to have a plan and do this well and do it responsibly and do it for the benefit of
Isn't that why we're
everyone.
here? Isn't that
I think
Blueprint
so.
2030?
Hey, look at that. How's our time? How much time do we have left?
20 minutes.
20? Cool. Yeah, let's get some audience participation. I'm sure there are many
And
thoughts.
while
out
you're
there.
thinking of the question and the mic's headed there, let's meet in the middle from land to sea. You know, I think practicing with family, when they say, what do you do? I went to the Duke University Blue Economy Summit last weekend. It was the first one. It's just a quick one-day thing. And at the Nicholas School, the really interesting thing was that they were focused on ecosystem services. And so to go back and to share with family what the blue economy is, it's pretty easy to talk about, you know, shipping and tourism, but then you get into the value of estuaries, be it monetary, spiritual, cultural. Normal human beings can understand that. And they're like, oh, there's a blue economy. And I encourage everyone to practice at home, because you'll find what's difficult to understand and what's not.
Teenagers.
Mm.
Great audience.
So we actually have a question from a virtual participant, Danielle DeLeo, asks, what are the panelists' thoughts on increasing/improving inclusion and training of younger scientists, the next generation of ocean explorers and managers, who will be generating a lot of this data in the next 5 to 10 years?
So this is something that I think about a lot. So I'm a fairly non-traditional scientist in that I'm in academia, but I don't pursue, you know, writing papers about answering questions about the planet. I work with data and work on making it available. And it's a very exciting thing. That's why I've been doing it, right? And I want to be able to teach people how to handle data, how to work with data, how to make data products. And so in my own little ecosystem, I bring students in every summer to work with bathymetry data in particular, to help build products that are globally accessible. So I do this through the Seabed 2030 project. I'm really trying to focus on diverse students that I bring in to get more perspectives and to provide some functional training. I would love to scale this up. I have great ideas for how to scale it up, but because I think it's a great way to build community, to connect people and students, to use data as the connector, and to teach not only how to build a bathymetry map, but how to work the best practices of working with data from all the years that my team and I have been doing this. There's a lot of implicit knowledge that we have that we don't even realize we have that would be wonderful to communicate. I would love to get to the point where people don't email me looking for data and they can just find it on their own. That's another thing, right? Like, still, it happens all the time. Why I'm the knowledge keeper of how to find data? That's ridiculous. So that's my own personal take, but there's lots and lots of opportunity, but I think we need some mechanisms and some coherence to build some scalable programs to get that done. But others, please chime in.
Yeah, I mean, the next generation of cultural scientists, oceanographers, technologists, whatever, is such a powerful topic. And I will just say that specifically my preferred action is direct mentorship. I do a lot of entrepreneurial mentoring. Young startup founders are the most amazing human beings. I've gotten to know some, and it's actually kind of a problem. It's like having an addiction problem, because their formal mentorship ends and they still call you and you still answer the phone. And all of a sudden it's just like, these people are amazing, right? So personally, my response to the question is get involved in whatever way works for you and find those young people and share what you have to offer. And it seems to work well.
I just want to inject there that the more I work with younger people, the more I learn from them as well. And that two-way exchange is critically important for us to really recognize and honor, because I know I don't have all the answers and I know none of us do. And so we really have to make sure that we cultivate a culture where we're open to novel ideas that might seem crazy, but guess what? They can really work.
Question, if I may, from the audience. Over here, Vicki, to your right. Yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to work from the audience, so I just started talking. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Rick Murray from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. A question I have here is about speed. And everything I've heard here, I support. Always good strategy, but it's actually true. But I'm very comfortable with it because it deals with setting up standards. It deals with community engagement, getting governments involved, getting private sector involved. And this is well in our comfort zone of what we've done a lot of in the past. But that's not going to work in the future because industry is moving ahead, and that's a positive thing. I'm pro-industry and things, but they work on a different time frame than we do. And so I don't want to feel comfortable necessarily with what I think we have to do moving forward, because my comfort zone is based on history of the last 20 or 30 years. And I think that's not going to cut it moving forward. And I don't know how to translate the skills that most of us have in this room now to this new era we're going in, whereas things are going to outpace us. If we put together planning documents and planning sessions that take 4 or 5 years to put together and build consensus and all this stuff, which is great, but it's too slow. And so I'd like people's thoughts on that if I could.
I mean, I'll just jump first. Yes, 100% agree. And I think this is an example of, you know, our model doesn't really work, right? We need to change, we need to shake things up. And I think that part of the intent of what we're here to do the next few days is talk about how to do that. How do we get these different sectors involved in a new productive way so that we can acceleration and scalability is like the dream, right? And from my experience in data, things have gone pretty slowly and we need to move faster. So we don't have the answers. We have to figure out how to get perspectives in to help us figure out the answers.
I'd like to come back to the Carr and Kyle white paper where they talk about extrinsic value. Can't say that word. I think if individuals they understand, they either develop the model for what the extrinsic value is, or it's developed for them and they really embrace it and understand it. Often that then sets the pace of what has to be done. And here's an example of something. I'm a mentor in a program and worked with a company that's trying to raise money. And we're pushing them to go faster. And I would say they naturally are at a more of a plodding pace. And ultimately they were able to communicate why they needed the money now. And it wasn't that they were going to run out of money. It was something external. It was something that was happening in the regulatory environment and in the marketplace. And there were some aha moments in that conversation. And so we need to have this conversation, of course, at the 50,000 foot level and at the, you know, one-on-one level.
Just an anecdote on the speed, you know, it's been 3 or 4 years since we watched live data come in from the Indian Ocean while they were looking for MH370. And I'm already kind of used to that. Like, how come everybody doesn't get their bathy data live? And we're working on all the bottlenecks for that. And there is an expectation that that's going to go faster and faster and faster. And so we do have to start thinking about that.
I actually think we're picking up pace across, I mean, just the people in this room, the communities coming together. I feel like the pace is picking up. And I think as long as we're comfortable with the fact that as you start to move from crawling to walking to running with scissors, right? Sometimes you might get hurt and things might get broken. So speed can be good, but as long as we're prepared for the risks, right? As we talk about some of this design and thoughtfulness, we may have a little bit of a stumble if we try to go too fast. Personally, I'm a big fan of the risk, and I think we should take that to heart, take the feedback to heart to go fast, as long as we're all comfortable with the potential risk, right? That's where it gets hard.
Well, and also we have to be conscious of, as we accelerate, we don't want to leave people behind, right? So how do we make sure that, you know, I think that the answer is probably we have to move at multiple paces. and recognize that there's no one answer, there's many answers, and we have to bring them all to bear. But again, this comes back to visioning and planning. Another question? Yes.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Naya. I'm actually here as an artist on a panel, but my question is from my time working at Papahana Mokuakea. To build off of what Kelsey was talking about earlier in terms of the vocabulary we use, it's like data and information. But I think from an indigenous standpoint, there's a really big difference between data, information, knowledge, and then wisdom. And so wisdom is created like intergenerationally. So I think, even the question prior of like how fast things are moving and whether we actually have the capacity and understanding to really manage the data with wisdom versus just being proficient, right, at filing, and et cetera. And I think that also connects, this wisdom question. I'd love for the panel to take that on. And then how does that connect to this idea of community? Because the discussion is as if there are all these separate communities, but like climate change doesn't look at all communities as separate. And then, back to the indigenous question, I think it is indigenous peoples and other communities that are being most affected many times by this. So I just, both that wisdom question and how we can actually integrate communities versus just being really good at managing data.
I'll let somebody else go first.
I have something to say about integrating the communities. I never have a problem having this conversation with oceanographers or people in marine science. But with what Ocean Exchange does, we interface outside of the ocean community because we believe there are solutions, including data, that were developed not for ocean, but have utility in the marine space. I deal with universities, research centers, our national labs, and more often than not, the experience is I talk to them, does this have utility in the ocean or the maritime environment? And their answer is, I never thought about it. Now that is a huge problem. And we're going to talk about branding the ocean later, and we're going to talk about it in a breakout session too. We got to get out of our silos.
Yeah.
I am stunned when I talk to someone at Argonne National Labs who's working on something very cool, and they say, I never thought about maritime utility or ocean utility.
That's the wisdom piece, right? The thing I love about ocean exploration is it can immediately bring you back to people, right? And one of the things we can do is we can bring it back to historic figures, right? So news a couple of weeks ago, they found Shackleton's ship, right? Had a chance to talk to the people who helped make the technology work. And you're sitting there talking about today's technology for finding something on the bottom of the seafloor and what those human beings did as explorers and the technology they had available. And you realize we haven't come all that far in a sense, right? And it does bring you a certain sense of grounding of, wow, we have amazing tech. Wow, they knew exactly where the ship sunk. And it turns out once we could get under the ice, there it was. So I love ocean exploration because if you're talking about wisdom and building interpersonal connections, it's such a powerful tool, right? And everybody likes to tell a sea story or listen to a sea story. And it's a great way to build some of that wisdom and hopefully build communities.
Does anybody else want to thought, or should we go to another question? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's questions everywhere.
And we actually have one. We actually have one virtual participant question. Want to make sure our virtual attendees are heard as well. So Catalina Martinez, we'd like to ask you to turn on your camera and your microphone and speak directly to the panelists.
There.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for this important conversation. I asked Dan this question directly, but he wanted me to address everyone. So I am listening to this important conversation about data, right? And about how visioning and planning and the speed at which we're collecting more and more data sources and types is important. But with that can also come this incredible growing gap, right, for marginalized groups who are often disproportionately impacted by our practices. And thank you so much, Dr. Leonard, for making sure that this is part of the conversation and for being there today. It takes a lot to be up there and continue to bring us back to that center that's so important. And so I wonder if maybe Dr. Leonard and others can share any suggestions you have for making sure that we address these challenges of the growing gaps, not only for all of these incredible marginalized groups who are disproportionately impacted, but specifically for the Indigenous data and knowledge and the sovereignty and governance of the data that must come with co-creation, which can often be left aside, especially during the speed at which we all operate. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that question. I'll be happy to sort of start and then turn it over to my co-panelists. There's a lot of stuff we can be doing, right? So I think that's why it becomes very overwhelming for myself and probably for you, because you just haven't been doing it at all. And so we have a lot of entry points where we could be working with folks through, actually partnering with Indigenous peoples, having them a part of the research team, actually having them lead and co-design the principles of the, the expedition or those particular exploratory efforts. Anytime you're working in the ocean, there's an Indigenous community that has marine jurisdiction over that space, in addition to the other plurality of jurisdictions that exist in those co-spaces. And so that's one way. Someone asked earlier about students. Academic institutions are toxic for non-white bodies. So when you think about how do we ensure that they are able to thrive and become the future scientists that we need to diversify these spaces, we have a lot to do within academia to change that. I love the work that URGE is doing, unlearning racism in the geosciences. There should be a chapter at every institution, and white faculty should be supporting those students and unlearning their racism. Really taking up a lot of the anti-racism literature that needs to be learned. You may not want critical race theory taught in your schools, but you as a faculty member, as a governmental leader, should pick up a book and read something. There's so many different entry points that you as an individual can take and then be able to spread that through family conversations, through conversations in forums like today. I know I've been very honest and in my commentary today. I hope I'm not the last of the exchanges you will have with Indigenous leaders in ocean spaces after today.
I'll take a shot at that too. Justin mentioned philanthropy. At Ocean Exchange, we see a lot of solutions that can have very high utility in remote areas, island nations, underserved communities. And they don't necessarily fit a traditional investor. Some of them don't even really fit what we would call impact investor. There is a lot of philanthropy out there. Some already have this mission to help extend these types of technologies, including the data associated with it, to these communities. Others don't, but I think with the right conversations could be convinced that this could be part of their mission. There's a lot of philanthropic money out there.
Yeah. I experience new information across different places. My cousin lives in Nelson, New Zealand, and she's become quite the outrigger paddler. And I lived with her in the US before she went back to New Zealand. And I finally got down there to see him. And before we got in the canoe, she led a chant of all white people asking for safety for the paddle. And I was able to perform the wedding for her daughter last fall, and we integrated more of that. And I guess it's not so much a comment, it's just a call to action to, if not flat out invite culture that you're not comfortable with into your life, into your workplace, to at least check it out and listen to it when it's showing up, because it is showing up. It took place this morning. We used to have Kimakeo Kapahelahua come and bless our ocean forum at Esri. And it's important, and it makes everything so much more joyous and lovely. So That's my comment.
I'm going to be the annoying engineering techno-optimist again. So it's a really powerful question Catalina asks, and we're talking about data, and we're talking about designing systems, right? Go read up on AI ethics. Go read up on how some of these technologies work, right? The robots are stupid, people. They cannot do anything if we don't give them the power, right? So we have an opportunity, at least in ocean exploration and data, to design the systems to yield the results we're looking for. So an explicit answer to Catalina can be, we can make the technology help us help ourselves, right? We don't, if we get it right, it's not easy. It requires thought, but actually tools can help, and tools lead to practices, and practices lead to behavior, right? So I think we have a real opportunity ahead of us. I'm going back to my opportunities, not my barriers. So it's be exciting.
All right, I'm going to turn us back to an audience question.
Well, perfect segue, Justin. Thank you. Because I was actually going to reference your quote, which is that barriers are run over by the power of opportunity. And as a jaded millennial who literally built a startup to overcome all the barriers I experienced in industry, I'm really curious, it's kind of open-ended question, how might we really create these accessible opportunities, not only for youth, but also BIPOC and Indigenous populations?
Yeah, I feel like that was kind of to you, wasn't it? Who wants to take the
Money.
lead on that one?
Seaworthy Collective.
You know, if you're talking about startups, make sure that there is a pipeline of funds that goes directly to LGBTQ, BIPOC, marginalized youth, you know, ensure that they actually get access to capital. You know, when you look at, you know, the type of minority women that have access to venture capitalist funds, it's like 0.001%. Don't take that exact number, but we're like the lowest of the low in terms of access to VC funding for any types of startups. Look at, you know, we love renewable energy, we love the push for offshore wind, but much of that is being financed by international funders. It's not actually benefiting or co-benefiting communities where those windmills are being put or where the transmission lines are being run through. Renewable energy is not energy justice per se. Just because we are transitioning doesn't mean it's just. And so if we want to actually make a just transition, put the funds where you actually can give it to BIPOC and LGBTQ youth startups who can then own the windmills and the wind farms and make sure that that's redistributed back to communities across America. This isn't rocket science, okay? But we have systemic injustices within this society that are linked to racism, linked to homophobia, that make it so that you don't want to put your money there.
I think that captured it really well. And I think we're pretty much out of time. Is that right? All right. So I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience for participating with your questions. And I guess hand it back over to Alan.
For an excellent conversation, and for Dr. Ferrini for so capably guiding us through it. We're now at the stage, we're going to take a 30-minute break before returning for the public engagement and impact panel. And I just want to say thank you for setting the stage so capably and for being honest and forthright. Let's keep those conversations going. Let's just be honest with each other. Let's listen to each other. And let's continue it out in the hallway with maybe a cup of coffee or a glass of water and a snack.